So in this video, I wanted to spend some time talking about refillable or cartridge-based rollerball pens. These are a quirky type of pen that are a conventional rollerball, like from the writing tip, but they use either a cartridge or a converter or something inside that moves them away from a standard rollerball refill towards something more like a fountain pen. And most of the time they can use fountain pen ink, but not all of the time. That's why when you're talking about this class of pens, it's a little bit confusing. So I'll do my best with the language. It's not always going to be as exact as I'd like. Here's a good example of a rollerball that uses a fountain pen cartridge or converter inside. This is the Monteverde Onetouch Engage. It's kind of a larger pen. It's on the expensive side, maybe $60, $70, something like that. It has a push button, which is not at all necessary. It's just kind of cool. And you can see inside it uses, it has a converter set up in there. It could use a cartridge. The ink is basically dry, but I can tell you it uses a standard fountain pen ink. So this is the sort of pen in the class we're discussing. And it's a good example because you could see what's happening on the inside, but it's not a great example because it's not a very good pen and because it's a lot more expensive than it needs to be. But we could see what's going on. Rollerball tip, this whole area is replaceable, which is something that you'll see with most of these pens, and then fountain pen ink. The reason the front area with these pens is usually replaceable is that the rollerball tip will tend to wear out. The little ball will wear out. And if you're using fountain pen ink, which is water-based, the tolerance of that tip needs to be perfectly exact. Whereas if you're using a thicker ink, you don't ever have to worry about the ink sort of streaming out. So with these pens, it's either a cheap pen like this J. Urbine, which is only about $12, or it's a more expensive one with a replaceable rollerball area. And that's, again, just as that ball wears out, the ink, which is fountain pen ink and quite watery, can start to leak out of there. This pen is another pen I've talked about. This is about a $10 or $12 pen. It uses a replaceable rollerball front, and then it uses a very standard ink cartridge. In fact, it's a standard international short cartridge. If you're getting into rollerballs that use replaceable cartridges or fountain pen ink, whatever, this is definitely where I would recommend you start. It's not a great pen, but it writes well enough and you're getting the full experience for 12 bucks. Just to rewind for a second, this is kind of a standard rollerball, and you can see it uses a refill like this, which is generally not refillable. The ink in this will be thicker than the ink in a standard rollerball that we're looking at here, which uses fountain pen ink. But the ultimate experience is the same, except that when you want to change the ink in this pen, you throw out this whole unit. So there's never really any worry about that ball sort of wearing out, because the amount of ink in here will last you like a fraction of the life of the ball. But if you're using one of these pens here, where you're using a fountain pen ink, most of the manufacturers recommend replacing the ball part, so this whole area, after I think every 20 or so refills is what Monteverde says to do. So if a pen costs you 80 bucks, you are gonna want more than 20 refills out of it, so you could replace that section for about $20 or $25. So that's kind of it with the background, and we've covered kind of an expensive pen that you shouldn't buy, the Monteverde Onetouch Engage. This is part of their Inkball line. The J. Urbine Refillable Rollerball. This is a cheap one that you should buy. And now let's move on to this one. This is called the Monteverde Paquito. And it's very similar to the Inkball in that it's extremely tiny. This one's different because it has a metal body, so it's a little heavier, has a kind of a weird looking clip that I strongly dislike. It's actually a little pointy. It's pointy up here too. It's a very confusingly designed pen. There's no reason to design a pen like this, but Monteverde did. Again, it's super tiny. I have no idea why it's so small. That's the same with this JR Bean. I guess this one was probably small to keep the cost down, but why use an expensive metal body and also have it be so small? I'm confused why so many of the cartridge-based or refillable rollerballs are tiny. I don't see any relation between the two, but it is what it is. This one can post in this sort of weird way. It's clearly doesn't, it goes on and it presses in. It's firm here, but it doesn't go in all the way. And so it can extend the size a little bit. Still very uncomfortable of a pen to write with. If this is turned, it'll poke you in a weird way. The body, the section rather, is quite small, so you're almost always holding it on the steps. It's just a very problematic pen. You could buy these for about maybe $10 or $12 off Amazon and eBay. This one is not a very good writer. Definitely worse than the JR Bean. The nice thing about this one is all the parts are metal, including this front area. And again, it uses the standard short international cartridge. And I'll do all the writing samples in a minute once we've run through all of those. So that was the Monteverde Paquito. As far as I know, there's nothing in between these two. So either you have this crazily tiny pen or this giant rollerball and nothing between the two. Maybe it exists out there in the higher end lines, the Inkballs, but nothing on the affordable side. Now let's get into my favorite of the group, which are the kind of, I'll classify these under the German ones, which are made by German companies, but that's neither here nor there. So we have, first three are from Stabilo, which if it's not a company you're familiar with, it's definitely worth checking their stuff out. They make a lot of very interesting pens, and they have a giant range. It's a lot of very quirky things in there. So I'm always looking for what they release, but there's just some weird, fun stuff. So we have here, this is the Bionic in the refillable version, the Bionic Worker, which is a non-refillable and the most popular of their rollerballs that I know of, and then the Be Crazy. The Be Crazy is very confusingly named because there's another one called the Be Fab and the B1 and all these other pens, but you have to be really careful what you buy, because they're not all the same. So first up is the Bionic Worker, and this is a non-refillable rollerball. So it doesn't fit exactly in the category here, but it's interesting because it's a really nice writer, and it will get you the rollerball experience for, and it's pretty easy to find. So if you want to get a Stabilo and kind of test out how their rollerballs work, this is a nice option. It's obviously ergonomic. It looks very cool. It's a really well-built pen. I like this one a lot. Kind of one of the more under-the-radar pens. Obviously not from an aesthetic standpoint, but just from like, you don't see them that often. The Bionic, as in not Worker, is the refillable version of this pen. You can see they're almost exactly the same. They just have a couple quirky differences. Basically everything about them is the same, except this one is refillable. I actually prefer this one. It's just not very common. You just don't see it around very often, whereas the Worker you could find fairly regularly. So this pen, it looks like a conventional rollerball, but you can open it up and you can see it has this really big rollerball refill to it. And it has a loose kind of water-based rollerball ink inside. It's hard to tell that it's in there, but it definitely is. I wish it wasn't printed so you could see a little bit better, but obviously it's a huge refill, which makes sense with a rollerball ink, 0.4 millimeter refill, and then 0.4 millimeter writing tip rather. And then you can see that little stepping here. It really looks like this piece is removable, and I haven't gone ahead and pulled it out and refilled this yet, but I'm pretty positive you can. And the only reason I haven't is just because I've really enjoyed writing with this pen. It's really quite solid, and I've been really recommending it to anyone that'll listen. So this is the Bionic Worker in the refillable, sorry, the Bionic non-Worker in the refillable version. Just a very, very cool pen. I think they sell for about $6, $5-6, probably less in Europe. Good clip, just good all around. And this is kind of the Be Crazy. Again, this is the most confusing of their pens because the Be Fab, the B1, the Be Crazy, they all look the same from the outside, but they're not all the same inside. And this is sort of the most conventional refillable or cartridge-based rollerball from Stabilo. You can see the body looks kind of normal, it has this weird pointiness. It's all plastic, so this is actually a kind of cheaply made pen. But if you open it up, you see standard cartridge, and this is kind of what you want to see from a rollerball in this class. You want to see it using a standard international cartridge and that connecting directly to a replaceable tip with a rollerball end, and that's it. You know, things like this Bionic are great, but really the truest way for this to work is just a cartridge or converter plugging into the writing tip. So if you want the standard refillable or cartridge-based rollerball, the Stabilo Be Crazy is the one to get. Lastly, in this set of sort of weird refillable rollerballs is this one. This is a Schneider, and Schneider has a giant set of rollerballs. This is called the Schneider, I believe it's called the One. I don't know, I had the name was on here somewhere. This is the Schneider One, and you have to be careful with Schneider as well because they make conventional refillable rollerballs like this one, and they also have weird ones like this. And I bought this one, and I was either shipped the wrong one or I picked the wrong one, because if you open up this one, you could see that tip looks a little odd. Opening it up, and there's a spare refill in there, and the refill is truly weird. Looks a little bit like a standard international long refill. You could almost make out some sort of feed mechanism in there, and then this is a protective tip. If you remove this, you see the actual writing tip is built in, and it's all plastic. It looks like there's a ball built in. It's just not a standard set of parts. So this is technically a cartridge or refillable rollerball, but it's not what we want to see. It has this sort of larger weird tip to it, and here's one that I've been using. But if you look around in Schneider's line, you will see that they actually do sell this pen, the Schneider 1 series, or similar ones in cartridge-based rollerballs. So you got to look out for the Schneider Raise or the Schneider Wave. There's a bunch of other names that are extremely similar. So they're very good pens, but you have to be careful what you get. So let's jump into the writing, and that will wrap up our experience with refillable rollerballs. Also, I have a full article on unsharpened.com about these, so don't miss that. This Monteverde is really not good, just as a reminder. So this is the Monteverde Onetouch Engage. And this is one of the higher end pens in the series just because it has this big body and has the push button. This includes a converter and a refill setup. So it's a kind of a more robust experience when you buy it. And now we'll move over to the J Urbine. Again, this is probably dollar for dollar the best in a standard refillable rollerball. It's very simple, very easy to use. It actually writes okay. It's not a great writer. None of these are actually great writers. They tend to be a little scratchy. I think that's just because the tolerance between that little tip and the ball are so tight to prevent that watery ink from leaking out, which is not a concern with a thicker or more standard rollerball ink. Now we have the Paquito. This is actually when I got this, it wouldn't even write. I basically just had to scratch for like 20 minutes in order to see if I can get that ball to wear down a little bit, and now it's writing okay. So this is the Monteverde Paquito. You could hear it It's scratchy. It just, maybe I got a lemon, but it's really just not a good pen. These things are hard to find. I think I understand why. I probably spent a little bit too much time tracking this one down and should have just given up. Again, good price. I was interested in the all metal body, but it is a little bit too small. I guess I should have known from the name that that should have been a giveaway, but again, I persisted and that was a mistake. Now we have the Stabilo Bionic Worker. You can see now we're moving towards what looks to be a more conventional rollerball writer. Really nice flow, really nice, just a great overall pen, super practical. Again, not refillable, but totally gets the job done. Now we have this one. Again, out of all these pens, I would say this is my favorite here. This is the Stabilo, and this is the Bionic. Just really cool ink, nice writer. Has that big, long, weird refill, which I'm pretty sure you can get a fountain pen ink. That I have to test out, but I've been unable to or unwilling to mess up this pen just because I've enjoyed using it so much. And now this is the, again, with the Stabilo, this is the Stabilo, and this is the Be Crazy. The naming with these is really weird, but this is also the Be Fab and a few others. And it's not really clear what the difference is between them. Before I forget, almost all these pens are using the same ink. They're using just some standard cartridges I got. So they're all using, you can see the dark colors. Anything that can use that standard National Short refill, I have the same one in there. Obviously these two are different. And then this is the last pen. This is the Schneider, the one, and this one, it's in purple. This one writes kind of like a felt tip. It's definitely a weird ball at the end. It might be a little plastic ball. It's super hard to tell, but it writes like a Uniball Air, if anyone has seen one of those. It actually looks like that too. It's a really strange refill. It's a very smooth writer, and it puts down a fair amount of ink, but I don't tend to like it. I had wished they sent me, or I had bought the standard cartridge-based one. But this is a very strange little refillable rollerball. I don't know why I got sent purple. I'm pretty sure I ordered blue, but anyway, that kind of happens when you're buying like very weird pens and hunting them down. Sometimes you don't get what you intended to get. This one, again, make sure you buy the right one, the Schneider. I believe it might be called the Wave or something like that. Or definitely you could buy the Schneider Ray. And this one is overpriced on Amazon. The Ray, I think it's like $18, which is a little bit crazy for this setup. But you can be sure if you buy the Ray, you're getting the right pen, which is a standard cartridge-based rollerball, similar to the Stabilo. Anyway, that is a deep dive into cartridge-based or refillable rollerballs. Such a weird little back alley of the pen world, but I've enjoyed kind of getting to know them. So that about covers it. Thanks for watching, and don't miss the article at unsharpened.com.